Sure. An hour, how many minutes do I have? 90 or
We
60
have
minutes?
90 minutes. 90
Oh,
minutes.
perfect. Okay, thanks. All right. So I'll be talking about managing the board, and then I've got a couple of slides I'm going to talk about. And then interestingly, when you talk about boards, I've got the outline, the board structure, the composition, managing boardroom dynamics, which is quite interesting, and then conflict of interest and ethical culture, and achieving effectiveness. So I'll just go straight into what do corporate board directors do, basically overall oversight of the business, and they're responsible for running the business in a strategic approach. Interestingly, sometimes when you say managing the board, or either I'm sure some of us sit in either the management team or on the boards of most companies. And when these things happen, what basically plays out is having to manage people's ego, people's temperament, people's um, attitude to things. Sometimes having to juggle between your chairman, your MD, and then other directors. Some might be quite domineering, some might not be domineering. And then sometimes what I tell people is basically when these things come to fore, no matter how smart or how intelligent you are, right? What comes to fore is basically how do you manage people. Your technical skills are not in doubt, but how do you manage in terms of your soft skills, managing people's temperament and ego? So I'll go straight into board of directors, and then what basically talks about is board of directors in terms of a successful company, right? What that means is every company is led by effective board, even though in as much as the board has the general oversight of the business, the day-to-day activities run by the management team and then by the MD. So in terms of strategic leadership, in terms of sharing, the management will do what you call the strat plan, and then they will share with the board for validation. Sometimes the board will give a bit of inputs and direction in terms of how they want the strategy to run out. And then a couple of times there's always a link between the shareholders and the company. So now you have the shareholders who they know that the owners of the company, either the institutional shareholders, individuals, or companies that are shareholders of the company. So how do you manage that bit in terms of translating your strategy not into pillars or into fragments, basically into top line conversations with your shareholders. And sometimes you have this interesting what you call your institutional shareholder, your quarterly or your half year review calls with them. And then some of them will ask you interesting questions about your strat plan. How do you want to navigate? Oh, you made profit in the last 6 months. How do you intend to sustain that growth in the next couple of months for the next year? So what they're particular about is basically this growth and the sustainability of your growth as a business. So in terms of board of directors, some for those that are very commercial in the Code of Corporate Governance 2018, basically talks about what a successful company will look like and an effective board. So in terms of definition of a director, I'll just basically talk about this in a nutshell. Person duly appointed, right? For those of us that are lawyers, basically appointed by the board either to direct and manage the business. And then interestingly, if you go through Kama, there's no distinction between a director, either a non-exec, exec, or independent directors. But in terms of practice, people basically distinguish in terms of who a non-executive director is, who an executive director is, and then who an independent director is. So some people like to classify, right, to say who are the executive directors that sit on the board and who are the non-execs that sit on the board. So I wanted to mention something. It may be unhelpful and even misleading to classify company directors as executives and non-executives. Because some directors will tell you, "I'm a director, I'm not a director," and then everybody, either in the management, wants as far as become a director, I'll have to sit on the board, where in quotes the big decision-making process is being approved or validated for the company. So from the board, I'm sure you know if you have a list of directors, there has to be a chairman that has to lead and guide the board. And then sometimes the chairman is always a man that basically has the maturity, understanding of the business that basically has to lead the company. And sometimes you have to work hand in hand with the chairman and another director. So you're responsible for providing overall leadership, right? So that way you have to be more mature in terms of dealing with the leading the business. And then eliciting the constructive participation of all directors. So you might have a director that is passive or a dominant director that might come in and want to keep dominating. Just basically what that means is the chairman must be somebody that may be able to manage and carry all the other directors on board. So interestingly, you get some directors that is the chairman, is the chairman's call. And then when you are doing your board meetings, apart from you aligning with your MD, you have to align with your chairman too. So the chairman is somebody that the meeting is chaired by is the chairman's meeting. You are basically to coordinate and handle the meeting. So the chairman coordinates the meeting, and then you have to work with them as the company secretary. So, what are the roles of the chairman? Effective operation of the board, such as workers group, subcommittees, in terms of either the audit committee or that committee, you have to work with them, providing guidance to the MD. So, because now you with the new corporate governance, you have to separate the roles of the MD and the chairman, basically giving support to the MD for on regular communication, like weekly, monthly, depending on how interesting that relationship is, basically supporting him in terms of the day-to-day activity. I mean, the new corporate governance rule says the chairman, right? The MD cannot be chairman. He has to go what we call to a resting period. So basically, after the MD leaves the company or resigns or retires from the company, there has to be a cooling period. That cooling period is basically a cool-off period. It's a period that means the MD goes to sit down and doesn't get involved in the activities of the company until after a particular 3 years. This area basically comes to fore when companies want to be very sure that the MD does not want to interject in activities or doesn't want to cover up anything. So allow him go and cool off, and thereafter he comes in back as the chairman of the board. Ensure that the manager provides directors with accurate, timely, and adequate information. So you are the man as the company secretary that sits on ground, that is the eyes, the nose, and the ears of the chairman. So you give him information which basically shares with the other directors. Sometimes when the dynamics or the politics of the company is quite interesting, what my colleague will tell me is by order of the board. You basically have to the things that you know that are too either too sensitive or too or what you call far above your paycheck. You know, it might be too controversial or too political for you to say. You might need to go through the chairman, and the chairman will know how basically you have to place that conversation with the other directors. Sometimes he knows how to manage all the other directors in terms of he knows when to place that matter in front of the other directors, either before the meeting or after the meeting. So what that means is it has to be a periodical interaction with the non-executive directors, basically like a chit chat, like what the previous panelists mentioned. It's not always very interesting for you to have your meetings after the board meetings. The director just go and they go. So sometimes it's always good to have periodic interaction with other directors. So basically to feel their pulse and to know where they stand in terms of decisions or some action that will be taken by the board on behalf of the company. So in terms of the managing director, so the managing director is the head of the management. He oversees the day-to-day activities of the company, which is in consonance with Principle 4 of the Corporate Governance Code 2018. He runs the affairs, and then interestingly, he's the person that manages in terms of answerable to the board. Some boards or some companies will bring in either the finance director to come and present in terms of financials, in terms of strategy, the marketing director board. The person that is responsible for the oversight and answerable to the board is the managing director. You should be very knowledgeable about the company's activities, strat plan, marketing activities, sales activities, your volumes, revenue, your sales, your turnover for either for each quarter of the year. So the numbers must be at his fingertips. Must demonstrate industry credibility. So must be someone that is very credible in industry, either in FMCG, manufacturing, either in industry or finance sector. So he has to be a bit credible in that area. He has the key responsibility for the day-to-day run of the company. Actually, as the company's leading representative in dealings with shareholders. So interestingly, some companies will put the company secretary as the person interacting with the shareholders, but the person that has the overall in terms of giving that direction, giving the approval or validation, basically the MD, to say this is what you can share with the shareholders. in terms of numbers and then in terms of performance of the company, before the company secretary shared anything, either in shareholder interaction or stakeholder call, either quarterly or monthly or annually, every document was validated by the MD. So the MD is responsible and accountable for that relationship. Do you have questions, or I should just keep going on? So in terms of now, when I mentioned earlier, I talked about directors. So the managing director, the executive director, who are basically supporting the managing director in the operations of the company. So these are people that are basically that's employees of the company, right? Responsible for the day-to-day running of the company. Employees of the company expected to devote their whole time. So basically, there are people that are full-time employees engaged by the company to oversee and report directly to the managing director in terms of the day-to-day activity. They create an imbalance in amount or quality of information passed by the executive to non-executive. So sometimes, because depending on the dynamics or the mix of your company, and then when I mean mix in terms of non-executive director, independent director, and the executive director, how do you share information, right? So when it comes to board meetings and you're going to present like your business performance or your for the quarter of the year, the MD would rely on information provided by these non-executive by the executive directors in terms of performance, and then the owners of that numbers is the MD. But sometimes the MD can call the finance director to say, "Can you just share a bit more insight in terms of how we grew revenue in the last 6 months or in terms of business performance?" So they are entrusted with ensuring the information laid by the board, by the management, is an accurate reflection of affairs of the company. Can you all hear me? So the executive director needs to strike a balance between management of the company. Okay, so the executive director, what some people call the EDs, they need to strike a balance between their management of the company and fiduciary duties, right? As independent state of mind in terms of decision-making process, right? It's quite interesting to say when you have a fiduciary responsibility as the director of the company, you have to strike a good balance in terms of your responsibility as a director and as a member of the board. So I'll go straight next to what you call non-executive directors. So basically these are not employees, or these are people that are not on contracts of the company, but basically engaged as non-executive directors, either being based on their expertise, right, on their judgment, on their experience, basically to come on board. Some people will invite lawyers, SANs on the board. Some invite maybe retired financial analyst, basically to get a fair balance in terms of one, the lawyer for corporate governance, and then maybe legal issues, and then some the finance person to come and help in terms of giving direction in terms of business and numbers for the company. They should have unfettered access to the executive director, so they must be accessible in terms of the company secretary has to be able to strike a relationship between the non-execs and the exec directors in terms of either quarterly engagement just before the meeting and then share information. And then you will be noteworthy to say before the non-exec directors get information from any of the executive directors, this must be validated by the MD. So interested, the MD might say to you, can you share information with this person? This person has reached out to me in terms of, okay, maybe in terms of numbers or in terms of your loan with the banks. And then the finance person calls the finance director and says, oh, can you share me what your exposure is in terms of debt with the banks? And then I'm trying to talk to the bank that has some good rates. Before the finance director shares that information with the non-exec director, he has to validate with his MD. So in terms of expectation, we expect they should be they have their quarterly meetings, and they should support in terms of engagement with the other directors on the board. Independent non-executive directors that basically they have no shareholding in the company, and then they are basically for sustaining stakeholder trust and confidence. So this is part of the principles or the principle 7 of the corporate governance code. So the person not a significant shareholder of the company, so less than 0.01%, is not a representative of the shareholder who is ability to control the management. So basically an independent person, right? Has not had previously been employed by the company in the last 5 years. So it's not a former employee or a former director that resigned, that retired. Doesn't have a close relationship either to the advisor to the company. And I'll paint a very interesting scenario. We had an independent director like some 3 years ago, and then we were doing an M&A transaction, and then the one of the directors was interested in that transaction because it was his company that was going to give it a financial and valuation of the previous company. And then because they had sufficient interest in that company, the board had to say, you know what, we will need you to step down on this matter because you are conflicted in this matter. We had a bit of back and forth, and then it was something I was quite interested in, and then the dynamics had to play to come to fore between the chairman and the directors, and then eventually he had to say, okay, based on this transaction, I was going to step down on his role in that position. And then the company said, no, if you step down now, the information you have from this company and from that company will still be conflicting. So basically having to show that there's no conflict in this relationship. He has no contractual relationship with the company in the last 5 years. So that's where he said to him, when he was resigning from the company, he said, but in the last 5 years, you've held position. So you're resigning from that company now will not make any difference in these transactions. Eventually, the company had to step down. The man had to step down the valuation was going to do for us and was given to another company. I've not been a regular in the last year. So some of those companies, some are like from CBN, from SEC, from any of those regulatory agencies. So basically, it must be not being a regulator. So basically, but after 3 years, the company had the discretion to bring in maybe a retired person to say come and join them. In some instances, maybe some in the banks, they might bring in a retired director or a retired person from SEC or those regulators to come on board. But there must be like what you call the 3-year cool-off period from that person before the person comes on board. It might not necessarily be the banks, it might be other areas. Some might engage maybe retired civil servant, retired top civil servant, retired top military personnel, basically come on board and then basically be an independent person, basically coming to support. The independent director should not render professional services. So he's not a lawyer, he's not the accountant, he's not the advisory person to the company. So it makes him independent. So what makes him independent is there's nothing conflicting in that transaction. He received an additional remuneration from the director's fees. So basically, he's not getting other fees apart from the director's fees, and then his sitting allowance. So if he's getting an additional cost from the company, it means he's not an independent director because whatever it takes from the company as an independent director, which is different from his director's fees or sitting allowance, might be conflicting in his independence as a director. And then he received additional remuneration from directors. So I don't know if I should go on or are there other questions because I'm trying to check the chat box. There are no questions.
Yes, sir. You can always check
Moderator,
the
please.
chat
I'm not
box.
sure I can see the chat box.
Some people have comments in the chat box, and some have comments. So you can just take them as you go along, sir.
I'm just trying to view the chat box.
Okay.
So let me start with Olubokun. Are there situations where we try around the company secretary to share information on directors without the obtaining the validation of the CEO? So sometimes every information we share with other directors, right, if it's not validated by the MD, you're not the owners of those numbers. You're not the information. Any information you want to share, you must validate it with the managing director because if there are issues or there's no accuracy in terms of information that you share, it means you are going to own your conversation and the MD might eventually deny you. So it means you've not taken consent, and then it means your MD is not in terms of that owning the numbers. So if your MD tells you to say, we'll give you the approval to share information with the directors. But in terms of looking at the matrix, if you work in a very interesting matrix system, they will tell you before you share information with anybody, any external third party, this was validated by the MD. I don't know if that answers the question. So then Obaro says, what are the components of the independent non-executive directors remuneration? So in terms of independent non-executive directors, there's already board remuneration committee. Is it the board remuneration committee, right, and competition that agrees on what they will pay them? And then, like I always tell people, appointing a director onto the board of a company doesn't come cheap, right? So it's basically the renovation they do. Sometimes you do a benchmark, right? You can do a benchmark. I work in FMCG sector. What that means now is I can do a benchmark with my peers across the industry. I can talk to guys in Nestle, Unilever, GSK, and ask them, what do you pay them? And we get a fair benchmark of what you can pay them. So you would now determine to say sometimes you pay them your director's fees, which is statutory, and then you now agree to say what will be your sitting allowance, which might be at discretion of the company. Some can pay as much as 100, 200, 500, depending on how you agree to pay that. And then if you agree to say now that the world is now becoming more interesting with people doing virtual meetings now, some will tell you, I need to pay money for data, I need to pay money for this. So it depends on what you agree in terms of your contract with the independent and executive directors that would make the components of your remuneration. So I don't know if I've answered all the questions. Okay, so we just go straight on. Then we'll go straight to so independent directors. Then, so in terms of the corporate governance code principles, the company secretary plays an important role, right? Some people will tell you when you do maybe your notice of an agenda meeting, or when you send your notice of board meetings, it says by order of the board. So basically, you are the spokesperson, you are the heirs, you are the mouth of the company, but provided that you get the approvals from the chairman and the managing director. Sometimes there might be a bit of power play in terms of managing your chairman and trying to manage your MD. Sometimes the MD might tell you, I'm responsible for this company, right? In terms of the activity, the chairman is just an independent person or a non-executive director. So it's what we share with him that he needs to be able to share out there. So I always tell people, wisdom is always the principal thing when you deal with these guys along the line. Because sometimes how do you want to share information with your MD, and the MD and your chairman is telling you that information which was readily available to you. So basically having to have a fair balance, right? And having to know how to deal with both parties, because you are having two masters that you have to show them. I won't call it absolute loyalty, but you have to be able to show that at least you're basically working with them. So the question I'm just so it says what's of institutions where the CEO tends to be overbearing. Interestingly, when it comes to board and MD and the chairman, sometimes there's always a thin line. Depends on who has that overbearing attitude. But I tell people, interestingly, it depends on what exactly your company structure looks like. In my own case, let me give you a typical example. I've had instances that I've had issues with my chairman, and he felt he wasn't getting information from the MD. He had asked the MD for some information, the MD didn't share with him. And then he sent me a mail to say, or it was a text that I sent to me, can you please share with me the numbers based on that? And then I knew if I share that information with him, right, and he get that information really available, it's going to use against my MD. So basically, is how do you want to strike a very fair balance? So when I said dynamics of a company, I report directly to the MD, and then I have a dotted line reporting to the chairman. So first, my responsibility is accountable to the MD, right? So before I go share my minutes of my board meeting, if I share the agenda and everything, I first validate my MD before I share with the chairman. If I share with the chairman and I go back to them, the MD will feel, oh, am I your boss? Who is your boss? The MD or the chairman? The MD. So just basically having to know when I went to manage people's temperament, right? People's ego, right? And then in terms of how to do the power play. I don't know if that answers your question. So um he has to be objective to provide independent guidance and support to the highest level. So as the company secretary, the board would tilt on you on a couple of things, right? Because it depends on whether it sits on the management team or not, but basically to expect you to know on some things. So your support in terms of guidance or in terms of filings, want to remove. So sometimes you get to a point that your board wants to remove a director, and then they ask you, how do you move a director at that point in time, right? It might not be in that same meeting, but they ask you, this person has resigned. What is the statutory requirement, notice period for him to give, right? How do you want to pay them? How do you want to manage their relationship in terms of filing? How do I want to file with the regulatory authorities or likes? So a couple of times, either the corporate governance code is your Bible beside you or your karma, right? Which is the Companies Act. So basically trying to guide them to say, you might not know all in terms of what the law says in karma, but it's basically the principles of how it plays out. It resigns. You need to send a notice, send a resignation letter. And interestingly, when you are in board meetings, there are a lot of power play that comes to play. For some companies that have multinational companies, that have parent company abroad, sometimes most of those decisions are made abroad, right? When they're made abroad, maybe they are basically the majority shareholders. They determine how they want to play, how they want this company to run. So in my own case, sometimes we will share our validator strat plan with our home company in Paris. By the time we are sending it back, the local directors are basically asking questions. Where did they get these numbers from? And then it now becomes that have a fair balance. That's where the chairman now comes to play to say, when you're having that conversations between your home country and then your parent company and then the local board, I need to carry your chairman along that, well, we're going to share this with the local, the parent company abroad. But once we get that validation, this is what we are working on first. Once we validate it, we'll come back to the board. Is always safer than when you have validated a strat plan or a transaction abroad, you now bring it back home. Some guys will tell you they are not rubber stamp directors. They need to ask questions. And then so when the game start getting to that point in your board meeting, it becomes very political because it means that you now need to start managing them. Managing them in the sense that asking questions, how did I have this number? Who validated this number? Who gave this number? We are local, we've got the native intelligence. Why are you bringing somebody a stratland that's not worked in abroad that can work in Nigeria? So basically, sometimes what we basically do on our own side, basically we first share the draft with them, right? To say this is what we are trying to work on for the next 5 years or next 3 years. We are going to share with the parent company in the next couple of days. Once we get the feedback, right? In that first meeting, they're going to challenge and build to say, this will not work well. This your strap plan will not work well. Can you change your numbers? Well, this looking at the current situation in Nigeria, dollar is a big problem. Manage your expectation. Dollar might go to 700 naira, might go to 200 naira. So we'll validate that with them, and then we're not going to share with the home country. But in time past, when we've had issues of sharing that information straight to that home country, that kind of, they've had issues to say, we've had the issue of a director saying he was dissenting, we're not going to validate or approve a resolution because he was not carried along. So that in that case, the chairman have to come to fore. It's not the committee that I have to manage. The chairman that have to say, no, how do I manage dynamics? And eventually he was able to manage that director and we got the validation. So the board approves the performance evaluation of the company secretary. So when they say the board, it's not everybody in the board that will validate. Some might say evaluation to say performance evaluation will say, okay, no, there are some directors that are very active, some are very passive. So some of them will say, okay, basically the chairman is somebody that you need to get validation, the MD, and then there are some very vocal or very strong directors that their opinion really basically matters in decision-making process. So should be empowered by the board to effectively discharge her duties. So in terms of your statutory duties that as the company secretary, you must give that power. And then that power will come from sometimes some directors might tell you, by order of the board. A typical example, you want to have a AGM or a board meeting and then the other directors are not aligned. We've had instances that we had a board meeting, we gave them only 48 or 72 hours notice for the board meeting, right? We have to first align before we share that. If we didn't align, a director can tell you, no, I was not carried along, I'm not available. So basically giving that power to be able to engage them. So proceedings of directors, so required to meet at least once every quarter, so maybe every 3 months. And sometimes these meetings are basically to look at the performance of the company. So it's very interesting that if you go for a straight 1 year, right? For the first, if a company is going to perform very good, maybe the first quarter, second quarter, right? You would have known, oh, if the company is doing very well, keep up the good work. Let's continue. The company is not doing very well. What do we need to change? So it's very, very interesting that you have your quarterly meetings, right? So it's basically to keep the board of directors abreast of activities of the company. So a director is entitled to 14 days notice or meeting, but should in case, right, you don't have that ample 14 days, right? You can manage yourself. You know, there's a meeting we want to do because of time. Can we give ourselves 10 or 7 days? If all the directors agree and consent, not a problem. But it means if you fail to give them notice, right, the directors, the meeting will be invalidated. What I mean is they will tell you, well, I didn't get a notice on time. Just like you're having an annual general meeting, and then a director says he has not gotten a copy of the annual report or the notice. He has the right to invalidate the annual general meeting. So basically having to manage them. And then in terms of attendance, you always have some interesting directors that some are very busy or some are out of the country. And then now that we have virtual meeting, it makes things a bit more interesting now. That if you're not available, we can do a 2 or 3 hours meeting virtually. But in time past, it was a bit difficult to say you have to start picking your calendar dates or first week of every quarter, and then like, oh, I have a prior commitment, or the chairman says it's not available. So you need people to endeavor to attend. The directors need to try and attend. And in case they don't attend, right? Because the truth is at the end of the year, at least you attended 3 quarters of the meeting of the board of directors. So sometimes when people are not attending director attend meeting means you are not really having the time as a director, means the company might decide to say, well, since you have that time, maybe just rather resign and then let's appoint people that are really available to give us support to the company. Resolutions that document that the when you do your minutes and your agenda, every action point you say the board at the meeting of board of directors, the company agreed to pass a resolution to approve the loan of 10 million naira from so and so bank, right, which will be reported and documented as part of the records for the company. So sometimes if those resolutions are quite important, either for regulators or you're staying to your statutory filings. Typical example: a director is resigning from the board, right? He resigns from the board. He sends letter of resignation to the board to say I've officially resigned, right? The board has to pass a resolution approving, right, and accepting that resolution, not approving, accepting that resolution. And then what I mean, like the company secretary will be told to go and file the necessary documents with the Corporate Affairs Commission. So in terms of voting, each director have been entitled to 1 vote, right? So if you have 9 directors, so we have 9 votes. So sometimes the dynamics of the company, we have even and odd numbers. So basically in terms of voting, so the chairman shall have a second casting vote. So he has 2 votes. So if there's a dissenting vote, he has a what you call like a veto vote in that meeting. Where it's not possible to have a physical meeting, all the directors present, resolution can be passed by written resolution signed by the directors. So what that means, like in this era of e-meetings and e-conversations now, as a company secretary, you write a written resolution to all the directors, and all of them there will be portions for them to all to sign. So once they all sign off, it means the resolution is passed. So in terms of board meeting, right? So when you have after that board meeting, so what you ask now is what are the evidences to show that you had a board meeting, right? First thing is the agenda or the notice of the board meeting, right? The minutes of the meeting, right? And the resolutions after that meeting. So which is quite important that the company secretary must be able to keep record of those resolutions in for the company. So in terms of board structure and composition, the effective discharge of responsibilities of the board and its committees is assured by an appropriate balance of skill, diversity, including experience and gender. So, interestingly, now most companies are now trying to, in terms of gender diversity, right? Either culturally, in terms of experience, or gender, to say no. Some companies have come out openly to say no. In terms of our board composition, we are going to have a gender balance for whatever reason. So, maybe 5 women or two women for a start, and then they go over a period of time. So what that means now is you have women, you have people from different diversities, you have lawyers, you have accountants, you have engineers, you have bankers, all coming together, right, in terms of diversity to help the business. And this is supported by Principle 2 of the Corporate Governance Code for 2020. I think there's a question. So so Obaru asked a question. Where we do not have up to 14-day notice period, can arrangement to short help against violating the meeting? Yes, I mentioned that earlier to say if you cannot meet that 14 days, or there's something important you want to do before that 14 days, what that means now is all if all the directors can agree to waive, right? To say, okay, what that means now is to say we have to have a meeting next 14 days, but because of time or the next 12 days or so, there'll be public holidays. Can we agree to do it in 10 days? If they all agree means agree to amend and to reschedule the timing, the meeting will still go on. But if they don't agree and somebody tells you that I was not noticed again, I didn't get that 14 days notice, it means you're going to invalidate that meeting. So it's about basically agreeing within the board. If you have a very cooperative board, sometimes a couple of times they would agree to, sometimes it might be 7 days, some can agree to the 10 days or 14 days, depending on how you're able to manage your other directors. But make sure that all your directors, all of them are carried along. Sometimes it means you're having to put a phone call them, say, I supposed to have a meeting on the 28th of February today, and then can we agree to do it 16th or 15th of this month because of, I'll be going on holiday, I'll be on leave, or this director will not be around. If they all agree, then you're good to go. So in terms of board structure and composition, right, an appropriate balance between the three directors, the company requires a unique combination of skills to meet different challenges. The board should appropriate diversity, I mentioned earlier, experience, right? Younger, older people, different backgrounds, gender, male, female, in terms of your board composition, ethnicity, right? And age. So in terms of ethnicity, some people tell you if I'm in oil and gas, I'll need to get somebody from the Niger Delta as a director, basically to protect my interest in Niger Delta. I need somebody from the north. I'll be able to do my conversation with the stakeholders with the regulators in Abuja. I need somebody from the southwest. So basically having that diversity. I need somebody that is coming from London or somebody coming from Paris because they're a French company. So basically having that ethnicity and diversity makes the body quite interesting. So you're not all lawyers, you're not all bankers, you're not all directors. Some people will tell you, what, I'm going to appoint a retired civil servant, right? Maybe one because of coming with his experience in the civil service, and then maybe sometimes in terms of engagement and then support in terms of engagement with other stakeholders. So different reasons for different board appointments. But make sure when you're doing an appointment that you do a validation with your appointment or your remuneration appointment committee to say, sometime when you're appointing directors at the board meeting, right, you share the list of the directors, and then they will ask you as the company secretary or the chairman will ask the MD, why do you think we want to appoint this person? Or it is because he's from this side and we think this is what we want to do. Some companies will tell you because they want to protect their interests in one part of the country, they appoint a particular person. It works for some, it doesn't work for some, but depends on how you want the dynamics to play out. So there's clear separation of powers, roles, and responsibility between the board and the management. Some boards always come with an overbearing attitude to say, I need to know what's going on in their activities. Some of them are non-executive directors, they're independent directors. They want to get involved to say, okay, what are you doing today? What are the activities? And then in now left for the MD to say how he wants to balance that relationship with them. If they don't get across to the MD, they're going to reach out to the company secretary. But basically, you need to define, right, that they are independent directors. They're not involved in the day-to-day activity. So once that is clearly defined, some might lead to friction to say I'm responsible for the authority of this company. I need to know what's going on, but it's basically how the chairman and the MD is able to balance the other directors. The position of chairman and MD should be separate. So basically, in terms of corporate governance, right, the MD is different, and then the MD, the chairman is different. Separate individuals. The chairman manages the board and other directors. The MD focusing on the day-to-day activity. So you can have a chairman that manages that is the MD that manages the day-to-day activity. So is the same person is the judge and the arbiter. Sometimes the chairman can be a bit very, very blunt to say you cannot run the business very well. You got that to ask the MD what's going on. The business performance not doing very well, right? But when the MD is the same chairman and same MD, he is responsible to himself and accountable to himself. So nobody's going to be able to challenge him, and he's not really healthy in terms of corporate governance. And then, so if it means you are the same person, you are the arbiter, you are the judge, you are the prosecutor, so there might not be so much corporate governance happening in that company. But interestingly, why these corporate governance things always come to play is people want independence in terms of reporting, in terms of way people do business. If it's a family business, the man will tell you, I'm the MD, I need to know what's going on the day-to-day activity. So there's a question here for, please, is it safest to that they agree to short notice in writing? So if I'll be honest with you, sometimes when you do those things, if it can be a phone call to them first, because I tell people before sending the emails to the director or to your colleague, make sure you first engage them first, right? And then it will be for, if you feel you need to cover what you say, you need to be sure you cover yourself up to make sure is a person that can deny tomorrow. Further to our conversation a couple of minutes ago, I like to just reconfirm your availability for the meeting in 10 days time. No, if he replies you, right? Yes. But if he doesn't, he might not want to reply, but ideally I'll be glad you would reply to acknowledge that you're aligned with that date. That would save you a lot. But if it's always good those things that are well documented, because once you don't document them, is your word against his word. You called me when? Where? I didn't tell you that. It was a mistake. You called the wrong person. I was not available. So for you to make sure get this thing well documented, right? Make sure it might be good to send an email directly to him. Some will reply, some will not reply, but you make sure you keep those documents ready. I just sent an email now, just to say, just so I can forward to my other colleagues. And then it might just be an email to say, after talking to all of them, they all, as further discussed with all of you, please, can you please confirm your availability? Some reply, yes, we spoke, agreed, aligned, please go ahead. That might save you a lot of dramas in the future, because sometimes some directors will deny and tell you, I didn't get that notice. So basically having to balance them, right? Like I mentioned, like, it takes a lot of wisdom, right, to basically deal with these guys. Some might just feel, you know what, I'm not interested in this meeting and I'm not going to go for that meeting. And then it might be a very critical decision that will happen at that meeting. And it tells because it was not there, the meeting was invalid. So just have a fair balance of how to manage that relationship. Availability for the responsibility, the board should be giving careful consideration to multiple directorship. So in terms of multiple directorship, what I mean now is directors can be very busy sometimes. You say I'm in another meeting, some meetings are clashing. How do I manage this? So you need to be able to make sure you be able to have that fair balance. The board should have effective committee. So we have got the audit committee, right? We got the governance and remuneration committee, risk management. So like the lady that asked the question earlier, in terms of remuneration committee, right? You can be able to say, okay, what do you agree to pay our directors every year? And then if a public company, right, the director of remuneration is always an item on the agenda for their general meeting. They say, I need to fix the remuneration of directors. So I'm sure that will challenge and tell you, how did you arrive on this course? Or what are they doing? They are non-executive directors, so why are they paying them so much, right? But once they have a mechanism on trying to agree on how this thing will play out, sometimes people engage independent persons, do a survey and agree on what the fees will look like, right? That will help you what the PR directors in under industries. So we have your charters defining the reference, your composition, your tenure. So you can be chairman of the audit committee, right? To say your tenure, your charter, your reference, your composition. So in my own example, my own case now, we have three directors representing the board on the audit committee, and we have three shareholders. And then what might quite exciting is our audit committee members are not really interested about the audit committee meeting. Maybe they call you for a CS. When is the next audit committee? And then I've done an audit committee meeting virtually, and I send the link, I send everything, and then I send money for data, and then the guy said, "Oh, is today the meeting?" But he just said, "Okay, please don't forget my audit committee. What did you agree at the audit committee? And just send me my sitting allowance." So you can be able to balance that bit. Sometimes it takes. I've got very interesting show that I deal with every now and then. What they're particular about is not the sitting a lot of directors. When we take our example, our directors' fees. For a couple of times we had to fix directors' fees we had to fix it for 3 or 4 years. It wasn't increased. And then when we're going to increase, right, we had to say, no, let's do a benchmark across, right, for the inflation, business performance, and then agree on X percentage. So we agreed to say the business grew at maybe at 20% or 10%. The increased director's fees at 10%. And then sometimes it's always very interesting to say if the system allowance or the director's fees are quite not commensurate to the service, it might be a bit of challenge, because it means if you pay them peanuts, it might be quite difficult for them to get the best from them. So the man tells you, "You're paying me how much a sitting allowance for, and why do I have to go for your meetings. But sometimes some people tell you, okay, sitting allowance is not something, just a little token for a director's fee, and then for my sitting allowance, I'll make sure I attend the meeting. So there's a question: is the secretary responsible for the matters arising or the directors? So the is the secretary responsible for the matter? The matters is basically for the board, right? But the company secretary is basically supposed to take actions and give feedback. But the director being itself, the chairman owns that meeting, is responsible for the matters. And then if he decides to delegate, he can delegate to the MD, right? To say after a board meeting or during a board meeting, the MD, based on this matter, can you please go and do a proper um, research on this matter and come back to the board on this matter. Company secretary, can you get more information about this matter and report to the board at the next board meeting? So the chairman is responsible for the matters, right? He just delegates to say there are things that are not legal. It goes to the it goes to the MD, it goes to that with other executive directors. Based on these numbers that are given us, the finance director, can you please go and confirm what the numbers will look like in terms of business performance for the next quarter? So those things basically come to fore in conversations. I don't know if I answered your question. So in terms of board size, the right numbers. Some say bigger, not necessarily better. Sometimes the bigger, the more dynamic or the more politics they have to play, because you have to manage. Imagine you have to manage 10 or 8, 9 directors, different people, different personalities, different egos, different orientations, different schools of thought, right? So if you're managing 9 directors, you're speaking to this person, you have to call 9 directors. Some will tell you, imagine you have a board meeting, you have to waive your 14 days. And the 9 directors are not available at different times. It means you have to keep managing them, right? Sometimes they might agree. Some people are sometimes it's always good for the chairman to say, no, I'll manage all the directors, just give me some time, right? Sometimes when they say too small, could be on LD, if you have 3 or 4 directors, right, to say it will lead to something that lead to friction, sometimes it's ego. So it's just having to have a very fair balance, and then no critical mass to sustain the LT debate. Dominant person, the CEO. So sometimes the MD tells you, well, this is the director. Sometimes it might be a quorum matter to get a quorum. So depending on what your article says, does it say for director? Does it say to third the number of directors? So make sure that you have when you're going to have your board meetings, you're going to have a quorum for that meeting. Could have a quorum? If you have 9 directors, you have only 1 or 2 directors. I'm not sure you have a quorum, so I'm not sure the meeting would go on. And then it's always good to have odd numbers. It need not be odd numbers. It might be even, but sometimes it's not a must, right? But sometimes even numbers basically. So when you have to come to voting, 5, 3, 5, 7, 9, it's always good. So if you have 8, it can be 4, 4. It can be a tie. And that's where the chairman has, he can do, as the second. But if you have 7 or 9, 4, 3, 5, 2, or it's always good to have that fair balance. And then depending on the business, on the size of the business, right? So affordability is something that comes to play. I mentioned earlier directors won't come cheap. So if you feel you're going to have 9 directors, you're going to pay them large chunk of money, why don't you have a very sizable number that you can manage in terms of paying your fees? So my previous employment, we had almost 9 directors, and then it was a bigger multinational company, and they were paying more. And then so paying directors wasn't a problem, but we had a couple of interests, right? So sometimes when you have to we have some that had a controlling share, that are close to 60% controlling share. So one director, right? It sits and heads the Africa division. It sits on our board too. So it basically has that power to say, no, that it controls on day to day. Or so the chairman, both of them, we have to align to say, no, that I own the controlling share. The chairman of the board itself didn't have the controlling shares, but it was the chairman of the board. It was a local person. They need a local person to be the face of the company. So the MD was a foreigner. The chairman was a Nigerian person. So basically, but where I am now, I've got very not so much number of share, not so sure number of directors. So I want to have a fair balance. I'm trying to look at the mix, which one pays better. I think having the fewer members is quite interesting because there are fewer people to manage. But in terms of a very robust, a very constructive, a very interesting board meetings, when you have more numbers, different experience, different background, is more interesting. So there's a question from Stephen. Is the secretary responsible for the matters arising or the directors in board meeting? I'll answer that question. I said so. So Stephen, You said your question is the secretary responsible for the matter arising or the directors? So in relation to, okay, in relation to shortlisting, you can also pass a resolution at the instance of meeting where all directors agree that the meeting should be held at shortlisting. This is under short way. Yeah, thank you, Shofola. That's a very good point. So if they both agree, pass resolution on the short notice, and then sometimes if you agree to say, some people in their articles can tell them that notice period can be 7 days. So it will be a good point if that's a very good point, Shofola. So Stephen, is the secretary responsible for the matters arising or the directors? So is the chairman and chairman are responsible? Is the chairman directors? And then directors means the directors, the chairman is the head of the directors. I don't know if I answered the question, Stephen. So the roles of the board of directors, accountability, so they're accountable for the day. So if anything goes wrong in a company, either sanctions or penalties, they look for. I'm sure for those I remember in the days of when they had the boom or the doom in the bank industry, they went after the directors, right? So the directors are accountable for the day to for the company. They won't act for the shareholders, they will act for the directors. They are the people that what you call the alter ego. So leadership in terms of leading the business, strategic and direction, define corporate ethical culture, tone from the top. So basically, sometimes the when the business performs very well, it's always good for the board to basically say, this is what I expect in terms of the tone from the top. Measure and monitor performance, risk management in terms of looking at the risk of the business, ensure true and fair view of financial statements, right? So when you do your financial statement for either for public companies or private companies, when you do your financial statement, the chairman and the MD and financial director are those to sign on the view on the performance of the company. So they get an overview, they look at it, and they sign to say this is a true and fair view of the financial performance of the company. In terms of succession planning and business continuity, right? Basically, look at sometimes some companies they have what they call employee staff turnover, right? To say so the board can basically ask the company to say to next the a director has resigned from the board, and then in quick succession, maybe in another meeting, another director will resign from the board, and then the board can say, MD, please can you please see what your succession planning and your business your succession planning is for the business. What I mean now is it's not left for the HR director to do basically your talent pipeline or your succession planning for each of the directors who are the likely successors. Either we are going to then resource locally from the talent pipeline, we're going to bring in employees outside. So those questions can come to play. And in terms of business continuity, in some instances, I'll take an example. Maybe in our own case, we had our CBN coming out all the rules to say this will not happen, and then the business continuity was threatened. I work in the dairy industry, and then we could not import milk. And then what that means is, if we can't import milk into the country, it means we're not going to do business. So our business continuity was threatened. And what that meant was we have to activate our business continuity plan for the business, basically to ensure that we don't run down, we don't shut down the business, the company. The board had an emergency meeting to say, no, based on this, so our business is threatened. How do you want to manage it? And then we had a subcommittee with the local directors and directors, ensure that we do the engagement and ensure the business continues to run. So, managing boardroom affairs. So, like I mentioned earlier, the dynamics is quite interesting. And then when it comes to managing boardroom affairs, sometimes it's not because you know it. I tell people, first, when you get a role, your technical skills are no more in doubt, right? You get a more scenario, what basically comes to fore are your soft skills, your interpersonal skills, your interaction with people, how do you manage people is always very important. And as a company secretary, you have to be able to, like what they say, you're the messenger of the board. You're basically, maybe not in a very condescending way, but you have to be to say basically have to balance your board, your management team, supporting and working with your MD and working with your chairman. So you have to be knowledgeable and abreast of all laws. So the corporate governance law, the newcomer, basically you get to a board meeting, right, and they tell you, oh, this person has resigned. The chairman asks you, do you think we need 4 directors? Can't we have 2 directors? What does Kama say? And then you pull out your Kama and say, okay, based on the newcomer rules, it came effective January this year, or we can have a single director. What does it mean to resolution? So those are things that will come to play in terms of our shareholding. How do you want to handle our business? So how you go or the business. So I tell people sometimes is always good, the articles, the board committee, the charter and the policy. Sometimes what makes a lot of difference is also understanding the business itself, right? If you work in a banking industry, right, to say how does this thing work, sometimes it might not be the rules, it might not be the laws governing that, but it might be basically in terms of what has been the best practice across. Sometimes the best practice for most industries are basically what people call the norm. So some is good you get abreast of those in terms of your policies, or you get to a board meeting and then your MD or your chairman tells you the chairman of the committee is due for retirement. What does the charter say? What does the committee charter say about chairman sitting? Someone will tell you, oh, he has to be a director for 3 years after he resigns, and then you need to reach out that fair balance. I mentioned earlier soft skills, good communication skills, and emotional intelligence. Abiola mentioned earlier, emotional intelligence is quite very strong because you're going to managing people ego, managing people, right? Sometimes the emotional intelligence is quite important because you can get to a board meeting and then your MD or your chairman can tell you, I've been to a board, my first board meeting I did, where I currently work here. It was as if they were marking my English exams. My chairman was basically underlining all the words. This is wrong. This is wrong tenses, and I felt like, oh, why is the guy trying to? So, as time we got done with that board meeting, I practically write the minutes of meeting all over again. And then someone was telling me, no, you're wrong on this. I didn't say this. But so sometimes but you need to be able to have that fair balance because truth now is once you are thrown off balance in that meeting, your productivity, your performance, you will know. So sometimes they'll tell you they want a mature person to handle a role, not because of the age, but maturity in the sense that someone that got that wealth of experience dealing with people and dealing in complex situations. I've had a colleague tell me before that there was a time they were having a board meeting and then that board was trying to move the chairman. And then the people abroad were quite keen in trying to move that chairman. And then it was basically, how do you have that fair balance? It was close to the chairman, and then the chairman says, oh, at that board meeting, the majority shareholder noticed that it brought up that conversation. They say, looking at the board composition, might need to do a shuffling of the board, basically to rejig and bring in new blood. The chairman was shocked because he wasn't abreast about it. And then next thing, I asked the company secretary, can you please tell us what does the article say? And then it was in between. It says how many years, 9 years, 5 years. But the people abroad were keen in trying to push an agenda. So it became a bit of having to have a fair balance. It needs to be very professional. What does the rule say? What does the policy say? And then sometimes you get to a point that what does the rule say? And then you need to be very professional, taking away your emotion, taking away sentiments, and then or unfair decisions. You just follow the rules. What does karma say? But sometimes you have to manage a backlash between your chairman, other directors, and the MD. But that's why you have to be able to get more matured in dealing with those people. You must be very confident. Um, Confidence has to do with also understanding, knowledgeable, and getting abreast of those things that the business talks about the law and about the company sector, about the company secretarial bit. So I would play a scenario. I was in a board meeting one day, and then one of my directors is a SAN, and then we had a conversation. And they told me I had a conversation to say, how do you do a resolution and do a quorum? And then I think at that point, I think I was quite advanced about what my article says. It says 3 members can form a quorum, and then the SN was quite knowledgeable. And then when we get to that board meeting, is the SN is the person that talks and says whatever he says in that meeting is the law. So whatever I know, whatever I want to say is not relevant. You see, SN, what do you think about this? So, and we got to that meeting, and then the man said, no, Kule, it has to be two-third majority or blah, blah, blah. And then well, when we were towards the meeting, I asked, okay, let me just check my camera and see what does camera really say. And I put and I showed the man. So, but I showed my just say, but the man he didn't want to say he was wrong, but he said, I'm surprised this is what the rule says. But well, couldn't just drew my attention to this, and I think this is the right thing. But at that point in time, he didn't want to tell the other director that I was wrong, but wanted to say, no, that I didn't know. I'm surprised that these rules have changed. But hey, maybe I didn't take notice. But sometimes those things will always come to fall. But in time, in trying to be very confident and know what you do, you need to also be able to strike a balance so you don't see as someone as being arrogant and trying to impose your own thoughts or your own decisions on the board. Because as a board, and you're a secretary of the board, the directors are responsible. So you have to be able to understand that bit. Some company secretaries are very active in board meetings. Their decisions matter, but it's always very good that you take notes, you take those action points, and when they call you, right, answer those questions. right? But they don't call you, allow the mediation, and then if they say, can you just get back to them? So I think there's a question. So
So you can take the question.
okay, so interesting. Directors with big egos. I tell people as human beings, we all have different egos, different personalities, and then sometimes it might be just a power play, and just feels I'm better off than others. And when those things come to okay, during a meeting, is the company secretary allowed to make comments and make inputs, or just keep quiet? So it depends. So it depends on what comment you want to make. Sometimes you need to draw the attention of the company, right, to the board on some meetings. You're supposed to, you can make comments that allow you, but if they don't call you, sometimes it might be rude for you to interject in that meeting. So if you're going to in a meeting and they come to if they call you, come to what's your opinion on this? You can talk, right? Or you can also tell your chairman, depends on how you have relationship with them. Some people have very cordial relationship, can I just make a suggestion, right? Some people can tell you no, you cannot make a suggestion, but because you're a lawyer, right, your opinion too would also matter, right? To say, well, I think on this. So sometimes it might be a very subtle way to bring in your idea to the table, right? To say, no, sometimes I do that. Chairman, may I? If it tells you no, then if it tells you yes, have the floor to say what you want to say. I don't know if I answered your question. So
Yes, sir, you can go ahead, sir.
okay, so I have excellent good record keeping capabilities. Sometimes record keeping is always a bit of challenge. Your resolution. Sometimes it can be your resolution I might filed 10 years ago. My resolution to say, a typical example, we sold the land of one of our companies in like 10 years ago. And then we need a copy of that resolution to show that the board practically approved that transaction. And then, to be honest, the person that handed over to me, right, I was handling it then, I didn't find it in the file. And then what that meant now is I needed to get that resolution ready. And then checking that file, there was basically nothing to show that the record was there. So what I mean now is the director of that company had left more than 5, 6 years ago. They've done so. Basically, so we had to start checking the file. Eventually, we didn't have it. And then we had the board meeting, and the chairman said, the record keeping is quite important. If you don't have this, then we'll be in trouble. So that's managing board. I don't know if I have questions or I just keep going on because of time.
Yeah, if there are no questions, sir, you can go ahead.
Okay. So in terms of board, the agenda and role of company secretary, accountability, owners, regulators, stakeholders. In terms of foresight, right? Develop purpose, vision, and values. As a company secretary, you must have those bits. Developing corporate culture, monitoring the external environment. In this area, we have every day, you have rules and policies coming out day by day by other regulators, so you need to be abreast of this. In terms of supervision, overseeing management performance, ensure controls are in place, reviewing key business results, assessing organizational capability. And in terms of strategy, right, define the central idea, setting the direction, reviewing and deciding key resources, designing the implementation process, determining risk appetite. So, so these are just roles of the board. And then, so basically, this is just what it basically looks like in terms of what you look like in terms of a board, what a board will look like in terms of corporate strategy, shaping the strategy, details of selected activities, annual accounts, right? Annual budget directive, new year budget, auditors report, audit planning approach, audit committee review, strategy. So they're basically trying to just have an overview of what things will look like, traditional board agenda will look like. So set talent review, objective for the year, review top 30 to 50 people I mentioned earlier. So if you've got a very interesting employee staff turnover, I tell you to review your top 30 people and what are the succession planning, risk, determine the risk review. So if you're in a very volatile business, so if you, most multinational companies, so if you work in Nigeria, one thing that comes to fore is inconsistent government policy, right? And in terms of what will be your risk metric for the business. So FX volatility is a big thing that you have to take into consideration, considering that you have to buy raw materials abroad. And then when there's FX volatility, means you have to be able to consider that at every point in time. Do you want to edge your dollar? How do you want to source your raw materials from abroad? So conduct a 360 board basically on board performance evaluation. Sometimes you can do it online, which is now, or you can get a third party, right, to do a board evaluation for you. the determined approach for board process and enhancement. So for every board, there are also always room for improvement, right? And then sometimes if you all sit in a room as the director, as company secretary, you might not be able to get a fair evaluation. So sometimes, what did you guys do well in 2020 that you want to do well better in 2021? Maybe might be attendance, maybe the minutes of meeting, maybe the agenda. We want a very robust and more engaging section between the management and the board. So board education, travel with sales staff. Basically, sometimes what we do on our own side, we take our directors to a factory tour maybe every 6 months. If we've bought new machines, explain to them. We have new products we've launched. Sometimes we send the product to them as sampling to see what are their feedback. They come with insights and say, okay, this particular product should be targeted at A or B class people, and then how do you want to get that market? And then so we get those bid, and then so we do research and development facilities, visit new geography. Sometimes we would just, all we try to do is we take those board meetings outside, maybe from our conventional Lagos office, to say let's go to a board meeting in Abuja, or if I have a board meeting outside Lagos, we can do the board meeting basically to have and see what the business performance looks like. So, and then if you feel you want them to, but sometimes a couple of, like, it comes to managing your, sometimes when they get to those field visits, you might see the director trying to direct or give instruction to the MD. And then sometimes the MD feels, hey, I'm not responsible to you. I just say independent director. So those things always come to fore. And then the ego comes to play that. Went for a market visit, and then this man is telling me I need to change all this thing. Man, telling me, you're not my boss. I have a boss. So those things always come to play. Some will tell you they might know it all, and they tell you, no, when I worked in this company 20 years ago, this one. The guy tells you, well, based on the strategy I'm basically running with, well, we'll look at, so if the MD is a very smart person, tells you, well, thank you so much for the feedback. We'll take in the feedback. We'll definitely get back to you, and we'll start implementing. The ones we can do, we'll look at it. The ones that we think are the low hanging fruits, we'll do. The ones that we think it means we need to rejig our strat plan, we'll do it over a period of time. And I'm sure in another 1 or 2 years, they might not remember, but it's just basically how you know you can guide those conversations. Because the guy can get a meeting next meeting and tells you, but I told you this. Yeah, we said in that meeting that we agreed that we'll look at it as a, maybe not as a what you call short-term plan, but maybe at the mid and the long-term plan, looking at our strategy. Like, our strat plan is for 5 years, and then we have done our third year already. So when we are doing a review for you, we are going to put your suggestions or your idea into the strat plan. So directors are fiduciary. So basically serving the interests of others rather than personal interest. So sometimes, when it comes to, like, our race up when it comes to, because we're individuals, right? Sometimes our interests are quite interesting. So we are expected to act in good faith, right? And a duty primarily owed to all stakeholders. So people, when you go further for your AGM, as you sit on the I table as a director, it means you are protecting the interests of the other shareholders. So they lean on you to say you are directors, you are representative on the board, right? We expect that because we are not getting involved on the day-to-day or the quarterly review, or we believe that you guys will have an interest at heart. So that's why a director holds a very key and a very sensitive role in terms of managing the business operation. So some of them are independent, right? It's okay, I want to advise and guide you. I leave it to the MD and executive directors to do the implementation. So exercise power for proper purpose. If not, they are liable for losses incurred. So like I mentioned to you, in time past, when there was a boss in the banking sector, people that they were held accountable were the directors, right? And then for those that know, um unveil something on corporation, right? So it means if they have to unveil who are to look behind, who are directors of the company, it means they have to look what they first to ask for are the directors. Those are the people that are responsible for the company. So if you are a director of the company, you have that responsibility, right? You must exercise care and skills. So what the brand director will do in comparable circumstances. So your best judgment, right? To say this is exercise care. Sometimes we tell you in my own board meeting, they call the lawyer. What does he think? Sometimes he tells you has a dissenting opinion or something. But basically, when we now explain to you the business dynamics, you understand and okay, I agree with you on that. So protect corporate property, opportunity, and then information. So detail confidentiality. Sometimes you share information of what you call your strat plan, and then for those of you that are in very competitive industries, so what you call maybe it might be in the food industry or banking, or so what you don't want to share your strat plan with, or you don't want the director to be careless and share your strat plan or leave it in his friend to say, oh, look at this guy's strat plan. So it has to be keep information in a very confidential way, not to further education, how realistic. So discretion is something that is very, 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 very subjective, right? What you call, something that's subject to human reason. Say what you call reasonable might not be reasonable to another person, but the truth is we all know what is right and what is reasonable. So not to allow personal interest to conflict with other duties and responsibilities. So, like I mentioned when I started the conversation, what the director that had the interest in a real transaction and he did the valuation, and then after a couple of times we agreed to say this valuation I actually gave us was trying to value the company lower. So because the truth now in terms of basically looking at what value the company will be. So in case we are going to sell the shares, we're going to buy shares, we're going to buy at a lower amount. And then so those things are basically conflicting. And then for whatever reason, as human beings, right, there's always a reason behind our decision making process, either personal or something basically makes us form a decision. Oh, I'm a director at all these shares. So I think I've got a question. So I mentioned to you what we have in Kama. Okay, yeah, lifting the veil. Yeah, you're right. Sorry. Nene, thank you very much. Lifting the veil of incorporation. You're right. Yeah. So kindly expatiate on the interpretation and role of independent directors. Is it provided for in Kama? So I think independent director basically this will basically directors in Kama. It basically has to do with directors, right? But in terms of corporate governance rule, that means you have to do who are the directors, who are the independent directors, who are the non-executive directors. Basically trying to define whose responsibility does it sit with in the company. So the director are not basically independent directors, are directors that basically they're coming with a wealth of experience. This is basically well spelled out, not in KAMA, but in corporate governance rules. So I don't know if I answered the question, Stephen. And then in terms of a director shall act a lot of time in what he believes to be in the interest of the company as a whole, so as to preserve his assets, right? Further his business and promote the purpose for which it is formed, and in such manner as is faithful, right? Fiduciary, diligent, careful, and ordinarily skillful director, which will act in the circumstance. So basically, what I mentioned was basically the fact that as a director you hold a very key position, and then people would expect you to be faithful, diligent, and careful in your decision making process. Another question. Okay, so next we'll go straight to conflict of interest. Like I mentioned earlier, a conflict of interest occurs when an individual private interest in any way appears to interfere with the interests of an entity to which he owes a duty. So if you recall earlier, when we mentioned earlier about independent directors, so those items that they had mentioned in that has to do with independent directors means when there's a conflict of interest, maybe a director has a vested interest. Sometimes when a director tells you by default, maybe a typical example, I own a property and then the company looking for a property in a very choice area in Lagos. And because I'm a director, by default, I basically say I've got a property for rent in this area of Lagos. And if you guys are interested, you've been a corporate entity, it'll be good to have you as my tenant. And then maybe the property has been lying idle for years, and just that since company will pay more at a premium, and if the anything goes wrong, as a director, I can always call either the HR director or call the company lawyer to say my company is not managed. So it is inevitable directors will occasionally face situations or potential conflict of interest, whether directly or indirectly. So it might be instances of, maybe it might not be a tender, it might be a conversation. I'm an accountant and I need to give a bit of service, and then so what basically means there are going to be interest. Oh, there's this person I'm doing evaluation is run, the company is run by my wife or run by my son or run by this thing. And then I'll basically sometimes it's basically is what they want is disclosure, right? Basically to disclose the rate of potential conflict, and then because you're talking to these guys that you're planning to acquire. Well, I'd like to say to you in this meeting that I'm a shareholder in that company and I'm also a director. So you'll be recorded. So whenever there's anything that happens thereafter, this person's opinion, right? Because once you don't disclose, right, and anything happens, right, people will misconstrue as you being fraudulent or taking advantage of that transaction. Because as a either as a chairman or as a MD or as a director of the company, you are privy to privileged information. So you know things in terms of strat plan. Typical example, the man tells you based on your expansion plan, you want to expand to the east. I'm from the east, and I've got maybe 10 or 20 or 30 hectares of land in an industrial area that I've not sold in years. And I know if this company is going to be coming, I would like to sell to them, right? And then you tell them, okay, well, in this case now, I would like to sell the, well, basically, if you disclose to them, right? Or a director in this company that is engaging in a pitch or a tender on the company. So just let you know, because by default, once people know you are interested, either the MD knows, oh, this person, the director is going to. There might be some, if it's your good friend, it might be a bit of favoritism in that direction. So sometimes it's always good to disclose those things, and then the company keeps a record of that disclosure in the minutes. And then what we do on our side, we keep records of conflicts in our register. I say, okay, on this conversation, the person declared. And then sometimes when you have to vote, right, you might dissent to say, okay, if the matter has to be put to vote, right, as someone that disclosed an interest, you will not be able to vote in that transaction. So I think that's a question. Okay, so let's just keep going. Corporate officers, right? So the judgment. So in terms of when it comes to your judgment in embracing opportunity and self-interest, sometimes people naturally as human beings always have that bit of, there's always the likelihood you have to search for your self-interest, watching out for yourself first before the others. But let me just keep going because I know I've got very limited time. So conflict of interest. So we've got a conflict of interest. So what we do is we do a conflict of interest declaration every year. We allow the directors. First, we give to all the employees, then we give to the directors, say, can you please disclose your conflict for the year? So stage one, the board identifies they have a conflict of interest. The board member notifies the board, right? Remaining board members determine the appropriate or remedial action. So what I said to you, if it's something that has to be put to vote or it has to, they'll tell you, okay, no, if it's an audit committee or a committee that sits on remuneration, or maybe as is, I would like to step down, right? Remaining board members inform the conflicted member of the outcome. So basically, like, oh, if there's a meeting that a matter that is being that involved in, you might tell him to step it down, and they might say, okay, because I'm conflicted, I might need to step out. Or if the board says it might say, okay, so let me just quickly step out for a few minutes. Or the chairman can tell him, can he exit for a few minutes? It depends on how the chairman plays that conversation to the director, and then they can call him back and then convey the outcome of the outcome. So developing a corporate ethical culture, 3 pillars: set a core ethical values, formal ethics program, including code of business conduct, right? Ethics training, whistleblowing. Most companies now, part of corporate governance is have an independent whistleblowing policy, and then have an ethics officer. Some people have to might be within the company secretary or compliance team, but most companies now, particularly in the banks, the rules basically some of them have to have a compliance officer. Then continuous presence of ethical leadership and a tone from the top. So when there are those things, basically, how do you set those pillars? You have to set your values. What are your values as a business? Your policy, your processes, so your conflict of interest declaration, your code of business conduct, and then the tone from the top. So code of ethics, formal statement, formulation, ideas and values is written, right? Setting out the guidelines, right? How do you handle conflict of interest? Sometimes, like a typical example, whistleblowing. How do you ensure that you want to protect the interest of the person that blows the whistle, the whistleblower, right? The person not be victimized, and then it will not be necessarily he will not be unfairly treated because he's a whistleblower. And a document may be outlining the mission, values, and then something that you can share with your board or director and share with the company. So once the tone is set from the top, from the board level, it goes straight, it goes all the way down to the employees of the business. So key elements of code of ethics, right? Mission and vision, compliance and legal regulation, conflict of interest, acceptance of gifts. So for some companies, especially some, whether a multinational company, they do maybe your acceptance. Some will tell you, in some companies, they will do a newspaper where they say, we don't accept gifts. We only accept gifts that are nominal or things that are not tangible or things that are not of value. Bribe, facilitation and payment, confidentiality, political affiliation. Some will tell you as an individual above 18, you have right to join a political party, but make sure your political affiliation does not affect or not rub into the business operation. Some people tell you if you're going to political appointment, you might need to step down, allow you resign from the board, and you go and take some time. Use of bureau assets, use of IT, your phones, your WhatsApp. Generic example to what constitutes unacceptable behavior, right? You need to define that. Misdemeanor, another action, enforcement and implementation of mechanism, dealing with code violation. How do you want to do that as a board, right? To say how do you want to undo that in terms of breaches of those policies?